Hello everybody, Pyraxis here. It's a beautiful February day, Saturday the 14th. Yesterday was Friday the 13th. I survived that. Today I'm bringing you episode 3 in my little series called an INTJ's Perspective. Now I call it an INTJ's perspective and not the INTJ perspective because I'm just one INTJ out of millions, and we don't all think exactly the same. So I don't know. I'm one of those specific oriented people, so I'm very detail oriented, and I look at things a little deeper than a lot of people. Like for instance, the concept truth itself. Before we get into how and why, which is what this whole episode is about, how and why we search for truth, I want to kind of get into what is truth. That alone I have to start with and think to myself, okay, that's important because I realize as an intellectual person that many people have a false conception of truth. I had it for a long time. And what I'm talking about is the fact that what a lot of us consider truth or consider, true, is really not truth at all, but it's really only our perception or our perspective. And I'm going to actually, that's a topic I think that I have enough on to where I can actually make another episode. So I'm not going to talk too deeply into that now. But that's something to consider, that right from the beginning, you have to understand that perspective is not necessarily truth. It may align with truth, yes, okay, our individual perspective may, but I think we all know that our perceptions can be wrong. And this is because something my mother said to me a long time ago whenever I first started considering myself as a truth seeker, which by the way was in 6th grade because of a teacher who had a certain assignment, and I don't remember all the details, but yeah, early on, almost 50 years ago, I dubbed myself for the first time a truth seeker. So I've been doing this all my life. But yeah, it was because of my mom. I was saying something about, and I was arguing with her, and this was back whenever I believed that I was always right, and bad trap to fall into. But I would say it's the truth, and my mom said something that just really for some reason stuck in my head and always has. She said, "Whose truth, your truth or my truth?" And I was like, wow, that hit me actually really hard as an intellectual INTJ. So I started realizing the difference between perspective and truth. So kind of like I said, we're going to go into that and probably in the next episode, just so I could kind of muddle through that and help you understand what I think about that. Now, as you know, the last episode was about the four fundamental aspects of our being, and the reason I actually made that my second episode was because that is one of the things that my brain, that my intellect uses in order to put everything into perspective, in order to help define, and I know I'm terrible at expressing it because I hardly ever talk to people, but bear with me. And like I said, don't think that I'm trying to preach, because as growing up, like I said, even from the 6th grade, I found that in my search for truth, I wanted to hear other people's opinions and thoughts, and I would listen, especially to older people. I was really good with older people because they had unique perspectives and they'd lived longer, they'd lived through so many mistakes and everything, and I learned a lot from them. So that's my hope here, is that by hearing me ramble on about all these things and giving you my perspective and my ideas and my thoughts, maybe it will help you on your journey. And I'm assuming that that's why a lot of people are here. Some are just family and friends just because they want to see me possibly just stumble over my words and make kind of a fool of myself, like I often do. But whatever. So the 4 fundamental aspects of being. I think that our approach to truth has a lot to do with those 4 aspects. And those 4 aspects, if you remember from last episode, was the physical aspect of our being, our bodies, the intellectual aspect, the emotional aspect, and our spiritual aspect. Okay, spiritual being our life force. So let's go down the line with that. If we approach truth through a primary, I mean, let's face it, all of it has to go through the intellect. But if we mostly focus on the physical aspect of our being, I believe that that approach would be called science, trying to explain the physical world, the physical aspects of our existence. Okay? Now, if we try to go through primarily just as an intellectual exercise, okay, the approach to truth, I think that is what we would call philosophy. You know, where we theorize things, that's the intellectual. So, you know, philosophy. If we go through a spiritual, the spiritual aspect of our being, then we get religion, or more specifically spirituality, the existential part and how that relates. And if we try to go through emotional, the emotional avenue, now that one gave me the most trouble, but I've narrowed that down. I think that if we go through what's, you know, the opposite thing, good, bad, you know, right, wrong, I think we get into morality. So that would make you a moralist if that's the kind of path you take to search for truth. Now, realizing this, I kind of have developed this way of looking at things. Now, I primarily look at things through, believe it or not, a scientific and a spiritual. I look primarily through those two aspects first. But because I realize those four aspects and the different approaches to truth, I try to look and line them up to see where they agree and where I might find conflict, and that helps me to differentiate between my idea of truth and what truth actually is, if that makes any sense. Now, like I said, you may not agree with my approach, you may not agree, but hopefully it'll give you something to think about and some way to broaden your perspectives. You know, so if you get stuck in science, try to look through another approach. Try to look at it, you know, through a spiritual aspect and see if that gives you any insights. Or if you are, you know, if you're very strong and you're having trouble deciding what is right and wrong, try to look at it through a scientific aspect, that you are not the only perspective out there. You know, you're not the only physical body out there experiencing things in a particular way. Someone else has a different view. You know what I'm trying to say? Look at it from those four different aspects. Now, I'm not sure if I pointed this out yet or not, but because I look at truth and I consider truth on the most fundamental level, absolute truth, that which is, something that is, something that, I could say something that exists, but that kind of makes it a little more complicated, because a lie exists, but a lie is not true. The fact that a lie exists is true. You see where I'm saying it gets complicated? And then the concept of time gets things complicated even more, and like I said, it's all due to our perspective, not truth. I think truth itself is actually quite simple, but it's our perspective that just makes things so complicated, because we perceive what's called time. Okay, so as an example, now you could say, I'm looking up at the sky right now, and I'm saying, okay, the sky is blue. Is that true? Well, it's a fact. Okay, now this is where I differentiate. It is a fact. Right now, and that's not even a true fact when I think about it. It's really just a wavelength of electromagnetic energy, which I perceive, again, perspective, as blue. But I consider it true, a true statement. But I have to keep in mind that that's just a perspective. The fact is that 12 hours from now, the sky will be black. So it's no longer true. It no longer is from this perspective. You see what I'm saying? This is what I want to convey in this episode, is that, you know, truth, I think, is really more simple. Something that exists, something which is, like I said, the fact that something exists is truth. But what it functions as, like I said, a lie, may not be true. Truth and true. It's confusing, people, and I know, and I'm sorry, I know I'm sounding kind of a blithering idiot here, but maybe somewhere in this, something will kick, because I've heard other people go off and I've totally disagreed with them, but I've still at the same time said, wait a minute, there's a point that I could use. It's kind of like when I go up hiking on the mountain up here. There's a honeycomb of trails up on the mountain. Well, I might say, okay, well, today I'm going to go up there to what we call White Rocks. It's a little historical place. And then the thing is, there's all these side trails that I could take. And it's like, okay, well, let's go around this way. There's many different ways I can get there. Because these paths, like I said, they all honeycomb out, and then they all converge and diverge. And along this way I might see this. Along this way I might see like the stream. This way I might see a beautiful old oak tree. Along this way I might see a deer, you know what I'm saying? So each path gives you something different to experience and appreciate. And my view is just like anyone else's view. There may be a lot of garbage piled up on that path, or there may be something pretty amazing. You never know. That's just like I said. And so, I make the attempt. And like I said, it's up to you whether you find any value in it or not. But, anyways, enough of that. What I consider absolute truth, the only absolute truths, there are only 3 things that I think I can hold on to that I personally consider to be absolutely true, regardless of perspective. Now, I know you're wondering, what the heck is he talking about? What is this? What does he see as absolutely true? One is that I am. Okay, I exist. That, to me, I consider that absolutely true. The other is God is. I absolutely 100% believe that there is some entity, what we refer to as God, that also exists. Okay? And the third thing that I believe is absolutely true is that you are. I am, you are, and God is. Those are the 3 things that I believe, that I personally believe are absolutely true. I cannot find any denial of those 3 things. What I am, how I am, that's, I don't know the truth to that exactly. Okay? I might have an idea what you are, why you are, what God is, why God is. That's the search. The what's and the whys, So, the how and the whys, how did I come to exist? I don't know that. But the fact that I do exist, I believe is true. So, I personally approach mostly searching for truth through scientific and spiritual avenues. Now, a lot of people think that they don't necessarily go together. They think that evolution and the Bible oppose each other. But when you really look at things and you, like I said, you see these different approaches, you actually start seeing those correlations. You start seeing how the different philosophical beliefs all have little fragments of truth. Like I said, the Bible says in the beginning, God said, let there be light, and boom, everything came in a big explosion. Everything came, light spread out everywhere, and everything was created. Well, in science, it's a singularity. There was a singularity. It burst out into a big explosion, and everything became into existence. Fundamentally, on the most basic level, that's pretty much the same in both pursuits, in both science and the Bible, which is one path of spirituality. But then if you start looking at Taoism and you see the yin-yang, the dark and the light, well, there was in the beginning, God was the light, and then he overcame the darkness. You see what I'm saying? There are paths. And that's just another, karma says, what you put out into the universe comes back to you. Okay, now that's a philosophical / spiritual approach. The Bible says you reap what you sow. It's the same thing, people, really, on the fundamental level. On the science, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. If you look at it, these different paths are all pointing to the same truth. Okay? It's just you have to find the right perspective to be able to bring them together and put that puzzle picture together. And that's what I consider being a truth seeker to be, trying to put that puzzle pieces together with all these aspects. And I think I've come a long way in answering a lot of questions in ways that most people wouldn't necessarily look at. And future episodes will be geared towards giving some more specific answers. Now, these first early episodes are just to help you understand how I think and how I approach things. But later episodes, I will give definitive ideologies on things, conclusions that I have come to. So look forward to those, because right now I'm just explaining how it all works. But later I'll be hitting on ideas where I actually do believe I have some conclusions that some of y'all might find interesting. And it goes right down to the very creation itself, Pardon me. Okay, so we've talked about the 4 aspects. Let me see. Now, of course, not everyone is interested in searching for truth. I mean, there are those other people who, like, I'm an intuitive, I'm a intellectual. We naturally search for things, we want to understand. But there are those who are more on the sensory and emotional side of existence. They want to experience life rather than explain it. And that's, I think, more common in our world than the thinkers like myself. Most people are out there living life and experiencing life. And I try to do that, but I mean, I'm just as comfortable sitting for 5-6 hours sitting in my chair thinking about something, you know what I mean? So, and getting details down and understanding. But like I said, today I wanted to get out. So anyways, I think we got about 5 more minutes I can cover, because I want to try to keep these down to 20 minutes. So what else can I talk about? Let's see. As far as the, let's get more into the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type indicators aspect, since this is called an INTJ's perspective. Now, as an INTJ, my approach to searching for truth is NI dominant, which means introverted intuition. You have to give me a minute. My brain, I live more in here, and sometimes it does have trouble coming out here. So now the introverted intuition aspect of how we search for truth, that's I think that relates to an INTJ's ability to look at the big picture, the grand scheme of things. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I take this approach and see the 4 aspects of being. And I see that it's not all about the physical existence, the truth. I see that there's a truth, an element of truth also in our intellectual aspect of life. There's also truth to be found through our spiritual pursuits and our emotional pursuits. I mean, I see that big picture. I see that big whole puzzle frame. And there's different quadrants, different, some people only fill out this area, some fill out, well, I try to fill them all in. Secondary function is external thinking. That has to do with more explaining and defining, conveying and organizing, those kind of aspects, and because let's face it, the intuition and the thinking, the thoughts and intuition are kind of almost opposed in a way. Intuition is more abstract, okay, but thinking is more definitive. It tries to organize, okay, but intuition is just, most often it's just kind of like what we would call a feeling, but I don't think it's really necessarily a feeling. We call it a gut feeling, or just a sense of knowing, just something like it's kind of a little indefinable. Like I said, that's where it kind of opposes the thinking. The thinking is all about defining, placing limitations on things so that we can put it in a box and see it more clearly, and that introverted intuition is more outside the box, more big picture. So, but you can actually get them to work together, and I think that's what INTJs generally tend to do, as a general rule. Third function is introverted feeling, which this is where I personally am not as much onto. I mean, right and wrong. Now, I do have a very strong sense of right and wrong. Okay, what I believe to be right and wrong. Okay, as an example, I've been watching a lot of this political news, and the things that they are doing, oh my God, makes me so frustrated, so disgusted, with these murders with ICE and all that. And I don't want to get political in this, but it just, I shouldn't watch these things because they really get my emotions flared up. Okay, and I can see that it's wrong. Okay, but some of these things that they're doing, and it's like, I mean, it's. Well, anyways, like I said, I don't want to take that path. That'll just get me all wacko, As you can see, I'm already starting to get a little more animated now that my brain is like hitting all these little pathways and everything. But let's get back to the subject on searching for truth. That's where my introverted feelings after I've defined it, after I've tried to see the big picture and tried to define it and try to understand it, I try to decide, okay, is this right or wrong? Will this attempt fulfill me? On what levels will it fulfill me? Or will it make me feel worse? Like I said, feeling is not my best approach. A lot of times I look at my emotions and go, oh God, why do I have to deal with these? You know what I mean? But that's typical for for an INTJ. Oh, there's my cardinal, my little red bird out there going to the feeder. He's beautiful. I got 2 pairs of them that come to the feeders. Anyways, finally, exterior, I don't know why I keep saying that. Extroverted sensing. That's me out here in the yard right now, picking up sticks and feeding the squirrels and doing these physical things. How do I try? I mean, I try to find personally, and this is an effort that I had to do, but I was raised growing up. My dad took us out into the woods, out fishing, hunting, all that stuff like that. So. But I've had to make an actual effort to actually get out more into the external sensing, so, now, gee, I got a little lost there, sorry, but my brain stalled. So, like I said, external sensing, truth, how that applies to the search for truth. Well, there's truth in everything that exists, is what all I can say. So, anyways, I think that's about all I'm going to cover on this topic. I know it was random, it's just my way, and I'm sorry, and I understand why I don't have a lot of people following, because a lot of times I don't make a lot of sense. But who knows, maybe something, like I said, maybe some silly little thing that I said will actually make some sort of difference for you. And that is my hope, and that is why I share. I mean, I know I'm bad at it, and I apologize. I mean, heck, half the time, as I come out here, I don't even shave. I didn't shave or nothing today. I looked out, I said, I need to be outside, and I just come out, and I said, what the heck, let's make that video I've been trying to make, because I'm a terrible procrastinator. I've been putting it off for weeks, and I think, well, maybe this is better than nothing. I think, okay, one last thing. I think another reason why we actually do search for truth, and this actually, I'm not going to go too deep into this because this is a future episode, has to do with our soul versus our spirit. Okay, and most people think they're the same thing, but even the Bible, good Lord, what is with these people, vehicles? Anyways, spirit and soul are not necessarily the same thing, and I'll explain that in a different episode. But I think that when we come into this world, this is just a very basic thing. Our spirit and God's spirit combine to create a personality, a persona, which I define as the soul. Okay? But when that is created, it's a new construct. It's a new person, a new entity, which is a collaboration between the spirit within us and God's spirit. Okay? And I'll go into more detail, like I said in that other episode. But when it's created, it is a blank slate. Okay? And it creates an intellect and an emotional aspect, okay, and a physical body to experience creation. So it's basically a clean slate. So I think this is why we search for truth, because when we are created, okay, we basically are here to experience everything, and and I think that is why we search for truth. Okay, so maybe that point alone might give you something to think about. Anyways, I hope that you do. I hope you found something in here that can make sense to you with all my sporadic rambling on. But hey, what do you expect for a guy who spends like 99% of his time by himself? So, all right, guys, I do wish you all well. Good fortune in everything. As my good friend, my good acquaintance, I should say, Dave would say, I'm thinking of you. I'm praying for you. All that good stuff. So, anyways, like I said, I hope you found something useful in all this rambling. I may not even post it, who knows, but if I do, then oh well. God bless everyone. Take care. Pyraxis out.